Views and opinions expressed within the following program are solely those of the individual. These views and opinions do not necessarily represent those of Shaw TV.
Hey Calgary, I'm Kevin Chorney. Today's December 13th, and this is Calgary Now. Poverty. It's easy to picture poverty as the images we see from aid organizations in third world countries or the black and white image of a panhandler on our city streets. Yet it's not always that easy to identify people living in poverty by the clothes they wear or whether they have a job or not. There are many organizations in the city working toward eradicating poverty. All levels of government have adopted strategies to reduce poverty to some degree. However, there isn't one simple silver bullet solution, as the issue is a complicated one. It's important to continue the discussion on poverty and to keep the spotlight on an issue that has ramifications for all in society. So growing up, my parents didn't have a lot of money. In fact, both my folks were laid off from their respective jobs right around the same time when I was a kid. For a few years there, our family of four was straight up poor. We got by with the odd trip to the Interfaith Food Bank, and I was able to keep busy playing organized hockey with financial aid from the Burns Memorial Fund. However, for 14% of Calgarians, this is an everyday reality and worse. Stats show that roughly 150,000 Canadians live below the poverty line. Surprised? I wasn't. I'm about to sit down with some guests here and discuss poverty in our city, how people slip into it, why it's so prevalent, and what we can do about it. As always, you can join the discussion by calling 403-539-6710 or drop us a line on Twitter at Calgary Now Show. Stay with us.
My experiences on poverty is that I see it, but I've never gotten close enough to it to understand. That's North American poverty, I can say. I've lived in the US, I've lived in Canada. I saw the difference in volume, I can say, in the poverty I saw in the US. It's more stark than it is here. But I think in the same breath, we have to go and talk to the poor people to see what their perspectives are and what their opinions about their conditions are, to see how they can get out of it and how society can assist them. We live in a democracy, everybody has a voice, and I think in the media and public policy, we try to help the poor. It's this war on poverty, but we never get their opinions of what it actually is. And I think once we do that, once we stop treating them like children, we can get to an actual solution. I don't have any prescriptions myself right now because my situation is so different from theirs. So that's the only step, that's the first step I can say to solving this issue.
Welcome back. Joining us today, we have Leah Kelly from the Women's Centre, Carolyn Davis from Momentum, and Cynthia Wild from the YWCA. Ladies, thanks a lot for being here. I'll give you each the opportunity to briefly tell us who you are and about your group.
Okay, my name is Leah Kelly. I'm a registered social worker at the Women's Centre, and my title is Social Issues Coordinator. And the Women's Centre is a drop-in community space for women, and we work in 3 areas, and those are get assistance, connect with others, and work for change. So just a quick overview: get assistance means help with basic needs services, so food, clothing, shelter. Connect with others, we have a series of free workshops for women to attend, and then we're also just a community space where women can drop in and have a cup of coffee. And then work for change is the area I oversee as Social Issues Coordinator, and one of our big focuses right now is women in poverty and working on creating a long-lasting change for that.
Perfect, yes, clearly. Carolyn, how about yourself?
My name's Carolyn Davis. I work with Momentum.
Yeah.
Momentum is a community economic development organization, and so that means that we work with people in partnership. They bring their assets to the table, and we see what we can do to help them move their lives forward and get beyond poverty. Our approaches include financial literacy. We talk about how to manage and save money and really think about the future.
Very important aspects.
Entrepreneurship. Sometimes for an individual, employment may not be a permanent solution for them, but self-employment could be an option. And so we do some entrepreneurship training as well as offer loans and coaching.
That's interesting. We'll touch on that. I want to hear a little bit more about that. Cynthia, the YWCA.
Yes, my role at the YWCA is the Director of Social Development, and I oversee the programs and services related to helping women out of poverty. The YWCA has been in Calgary for over 100 years, and our mission is women thriving in a safe and equitable society, and really that's what my role is around poverty reduction for the women we serve.
Fantastic. Again, thanks for being here. So let's start. I'll throw it out there, open question. Ladies, what exactly is poverty? Cynthia, you want to take that?
Well, I support the definition that's really been produced by Vibrant Communities Calgary, which really talks about poverty is a lack of resources, financial and otherwise, that really interfere with an individual's ability to fully participate in society, in social, in the political fabric and the economic fabric of society, but also really it limits the choice that a person can have about meeting their own goals and their own future as well.
Sure. Carolyn, you would agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree. And what I like about that definition is that poverty is not something that defines a person. It's a lack of resources, but a person is not poor necessarily. They are poor in resources. And that's important to me, so that someone retains their dignity.
It seems as though a lot of the emphasis on poverty is put on the monetary, the financial side of things. Not always the case, though, is it, Leah?
Absolutely not. No, I think there always is a focus on poverty being a lack of those basic needs. But when we look at a comprehensive definition of poverty, and if we look at poverty reduction plans in other provinces, there have been some really good examples of comprehensive definitions, which include that ability to participate fully in the economic, cultural, social, political lives of our communities. And that's something that all of us value and all of us have the right to be able to do.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, with that said, the general population, you've obviously got a plethora of experience amongst the three of you. How do people receive poverty? Do people care enough locally in Calgary about poverty? And is government doing enough to prevent, to help people from sliding into poverty? Is it something we can mandate at the government level to really do more to prevent it?
Well, I think we're living in a very hopeful time.
Yes.
Provincially, part of her election promise, Premier Redford did talk about a 10-year plan to end poverty in Alberta, and actually a 5-year plan to end childhood poverty in Alberta. That was very exciting, and since then she's launched the social policy framework, which has really been a great community engagement initiative to talk about what kind of Alberta do we want to have in the future. And so there are a lot of, and then locally, of course, we have a Calgary Poverty Reduction Initiative spearheaded through the City of Calgary and United Way, and we've all been part of that in some way, and I think we're living in hopeful times. Having said that, there are some stark realities related to the numbers and the actual money involved in poverty. We live in a province with the lowest minimum wage at $9.40 an hour. We're the lowest minimum wage in the country and one of the highest costs of living. So while poverty is more than about income, it's always about income.
Leah, I'm sure you would, sorry to argue, I mean, absolutely. What about the general perception of poverty amongst citizens of our city?
I think that there are still some pretty pervasive attitudes that people living in poverty are lazy, that people living in poverty are those folks that you see on the street. But especially applying a gender lens to it at the Women's Centre, I can say that women's poverty, it goes unnoticed. You don't see women on the streets.
It's interesting, yeah.
I also just want to add that there's a huge number of people that are working poor. So I think it talked about it a little bit in the intro, but there's this perception that somebody living in poverty has a certain look and is living on the streets, but we can say for sure that that's not the reality in Calgary.
Is there a key demographic of human being in Calgary that is more prone to poverty? I mean, what do the stats say?
Well, I mean,
is it single moms? Is it new Canadians? Is it seniors? Or is it across the gamut?
I think you've just named a number of groups that are particularly vulnerable to poverty, but what we know about the city in Calgary in particular that's unique, and maybe why it's not being seen, is that our poverty is quite geographically dispersed, and so there's not really stark pockets of poverty in our city. There's also the factors that can hide it, like high consumer debt levels. So someone may present as having all the assets in place to be able to function in society, but behind that it's a thin veil to a really stressful situation for a family, and that can lead to more challenge.
Actually, we had a few people post on our Facebook page, John Baptist and Jamal Ahmed. Thanks guys very much for the comment, and basically they're saying the same thing. They think a lot of people are quote-unquote trying to keep up with the Joneses, and they're not really taking care of their own responsibilities financially before the basic necessities. They're not they've got things backwards, clearly. Do you see that a lot with Momentum?
You know, what
Financial
we see is something... We see something a little bit nuanced from that, I would say. We work with individuals who are ready to take hold of their financial futures. They're ready to really think about what does it mean to have a budget? What does it mean to manage credit in a way that is responsible? But I do wonder if we have a connection that we make immediately, that consumer debt is connected to irresponsibility. Sometimes it is a resort that people must take in order to maintain their housing and to maintain some of those basic needs. And so when you're making a decision about whether to buy groceries on a credit card or to not purchase groceries, the choice to go for consumer debt is actually not a choice anymore.
What about that argument that, you know, you've got a smartphone at home, the plasma HD TV, and you're utilizing the food bank? Is this something that's happening?
Well, you know, I don't work at the food bank.
No,
so
fair
I
enough.
haven't experienced that myself personally. So, yeah.
It's definitely.
But what you bring into what you raise though is a question around, you know, judgment and somehow people living in poverty. One of the greatest assaults is on their dignity, and respect for the individual. And whereas I wouldn't expect to be making judgments on what you have at your home in terms of plasma TVs, somehow it seems as though it's fair game when people are living in poverty that we make judgments about, well, why are they smoking, or they have a cell phone. It seems like that somehow they're open up to a different level of privacy. And
which is unfair, isn't it?
It's very unfair.
It is unfair, isn't it? The term social capital is one that's kicked around, you know, quite frequently with regards to poverty. Can somebody define social capital for me? Leah, you want to take a stab at it?
I guess social capital being, if we place value on assets and things that we can see, houses, cars, but social capital, I would say, is having relationships, being connected to your community,
sure.
Having the time and resources to build that social capital.
Is this part of the focus then at the YWCA as well, trying to build that social capital?
Absolutely. We have a number of programs. Our community housing program, which helps women after they leave our shelter into permanent housing, where the whole focus is in terms of inclusion in the community. I mean, a person can be in a community but not of a community.
Right.
And that is a key factor that you've raised, because the Calgary Foundation's report to the community was clear that one of the lowest areas that Calgary scores is people's perceptions they're connected to their neighborhood. Part of that has to do with, because we have a very transient population. Some people come here to work and then they're going to go back to where they came from and don't really feel the need to connect. But that raises real concerns when it comes to everybody owning the issue of poverty. Because if I'm not invested in my neighborhood or my neighbors, why do I necessarily care about their financial well-being?
Exactly. I'll let you jump in there. Just give me a quick moment, folks. We are going to take a quick break. If you have any questions, please do give us a call or send us a tweet. Stay with us.
I think the issue of poverty in Calgary is actually quite a deepening and wide issue. I think people have this perception of poverty just being the homeless, quote-unquote drunk guy they see at the local C train station begging for change, but I think it's more than that. I think people need to realize that poverty is like the double income family with 1 or 2 kids that needs to go to the food bank because they can't afford to have a bus pass, put their kids in school in some sort of activity so they stay healthy, try to buy decent food for them instead of crap dinner all the time. I do think something needs to be done to that, whether I'm not sure what the solution would be perhaps, but I do think that it is quite a far-reaching issue, farther than most people may think, and there's so much money in Calgary really, you know, you're not going to, unless you take the transit or have some sort of interaction with them, you're never going to see them. You're never going to see those people that actually need a lot of our help, and a solution needs to be come up with.
Hey Calgary, welcome back. Tonight we're discussing poverty in our city. So Carolyn, I cut you off there briefly. We're talking about social capital. It looked like you wanted to jump in.
Well, one of the things that we have learned at Momentum is that we call it social assets. We talk about building our social assets. And we know that building social assets for individuals, helping them connect to others, can actually lead to growth in financial assets. So if you think about, and if your listeners think back to how did they get their first employment or their first big break, it's often through knowing someone.
Yeah, right.
And so we really do encourage people to connect. One of the questions we get at Momentum sometimes is why we wouldn't scale our programs by putting it online. And we hesitate to do that. We like to have people come where they can build their social connections and then eventually rely on them.
That makes perfect sense. And it begs the question then, community services and support groups, outlets that are there, that people tend to rely on perhaps a bit too heavily. Now, is that inadvertently detracting from the potential social capital that those people can build? It's kind of a fine line.
Well, it is a fine line, and you know, by the time many women come to us, I'm thinking of our YWCA Mary Dover House, which serves 100 homeless women. By the time the women come to us to stay, they've burnt a lot of bridges in their informal networks. Some of their choices that have been made, some of the conflict perhaps in their family of origin, and maybe they're coming from on reserve into town, and this is the first place that they meet. And often they develop social capital within our facility, and then the challenge is then how do you build that support network for women once they leave our residence?
That's fascinating. And it just goes to show how important it is. I mean, if it's happening there, maybe a bit of support outside, and they're flourishing on their own, these women. Leah, you notice the same thing.
I can't say that I have ever experienced people using the center too much, coming to the Women's Center too much.
Yeah.
And on several occasions, I've asked a room of people, would you rather give help or receive help?
Yeah.
Everybody would always rather give help. And so we find women don't ask for what they don't need.
Yeah, that's fair. I understand we have a caller. Hello, caller, are you there?
Hi.
Hello,
this is Mr. for Cynthia. I was just wondering what the number of homeless are in Calgary right now.
Oh, I'm going to cut you off there. Appreciate the phone call. Cynthia, the number of homeless in Calgary, any idea?
Well, I think that's difficult to for me to say. I mean, we've had a homeless count done in the summer. What I do know is how many of the homeless in Calgary are women, and that's roughly 20%. So, and I think that with the 10-year plan to end homelessness, we've certainly housed over I think they're up to 4,000 people that they've housed that were homeless. But because of migration into our city, because of our strong economic base, we've not been able to actually stop the numbers from growing, and in fact this year we're offering a winter emergency response program for women who otherwise would freeze to death. So it's still a big issue, but I'm sorry, I don't have the number today of homeless individuals.
That's definitely fair. Carolyn, are you seeing the same thing? You're seeing a rise in numbers, people coming through your facility?
Well, at Momentum, we don't work necessarily with the homeless population. So one of the things that we know for sure is that the group that are homeless is just a subset of the broader group of individuals living in poverty, right?
Yeah. I understand that, but are you, in general though, regardless, those who were perhaps were homeless at one point were able to utilize one of the other organizations and find their way to Momentum to just kind of get that last step. Are you seeing an increase?
We haven't seen significant growth now, but it does ebb and flow with the economy. And so as we start to sense that things are beginning to heat up, we're bracing ourselves and we'll be prepared for that.
How about over at the Women's Center?
Absolutely. We've outgrown our space.
Wow, is that right?
We've outgrown our space. We've seen the numbers increase tremendously over the years, and there are days when I literally cannot get to my desk. There are so many women in the center.
That's not great news, though, is it? I mean, what's the root cause here?
Lack of income.
Yeah. So we touched a little bit briefly on the cost of living in Calgary. Now, did a little bit of reading. The average two-bedroom dwelling is something like $1,089 a month. Minimum wage being $9.40. You know, before taxes, we're talking about $1,500 a month. You know, single mom, if you've got kids, daycare. I mean, where's the answer? Is it raising the minimum wage? Do we need to perhaps make some of these illegal suites in Calgary legal? Is that going to help, or is that going to hamper? What do you think about the illegal suites?
Well, I think secondary suites are a great idea. I think any idea that's innovative to help expand our affordable housing stock in Calgary needs to be seriously considered. Our housing prices are unaffordable. I think I read a report saying over the last 10 years, the price of housing has gone up 156%, but incomes have only gone up 34%. And like you, at minimum wage at $9.40, that's on an average 35-hour work week, that's $17,108 per year. And to have a bachelor apartment, you need $29,000 in Calgary. So there is definitely a disparity in that, and really dispels the myth that working people can't be poor, that somehow it is the homeless individual.
Clearly. Did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the majority of minimum wage workers are women, the majority of part-time workers are women, and we see 70% of our contacts are single mothers. And when we look at that rate of $9.40 an hour, which translates to $17,000 a year, but then we've also defined what we call low income cutoff rate, as if you live below that income, you're living in poverty. And there's about a $5,000 difference a year between that $17,000 a year you can earn on minimum wage and that $5,000 cutoff, but that's also for a single person. So if you're a single mother, you can be working full time, earning minimum wage, but you're absolutely living in poverty.
Because of the childcare, I mean, the cost of childcare alone, even with full government subsidy, there's still a difference. I mean, an average childcare space in the city would be between $1,200, $1,400, and your maximum subsidy from the province is around $900. So that gap of $300 to $400 is impossible when you're on minimum wage, and there's really a disincentive then for women to work who are single mothers.
You know, like the income issue is really important, and at Momentum we'll talk about how we really do need income in order to get by, and you need adequate income to get by. What gets people ahead is the ability to build assets. And so imagine living on those small incomes and thinking about how long it would take to build up even a $1,500 emergency fund, which would be just enough in order to cover something unexpected. It's really challenging. So when we think about solutions, at least from the Momentum perspective, we think, what do we need to do to improve income, but also how can we assist people to build their assets?
And how do we do that? Skill set, developing skills, I suppose, like you say, financial literacy.
At Momentum, we talk about saving, but we also talk a little bit about savings incentives. So for an individual who's really thinking, I want to save for my future, they can join us on a savings program. They save in their own bank account, and Momentum can actually match those savings at a fairly good ratio, 3 to 1 in some cases. And so that gives a power boost to the savings behavior. We can say, you know, this saving thing is a really good idea. It's going to help you move ahead, especially when something unexpected comes forward, a medical bill, something for children.
The self-sufficiency, I think, is the end game for a lot of people.
Exactly.
Clearly. So then what can Calgarians do besides throwing money towards the issue? What else can Calgarians do to get involved and really help these people turn the corner? I'll ask you, I guess, specifically for each of your organizations.
Well, I think Calgarians are really good at throwing money at it, as you said, especially during the holiday season. We find a lot of people that are willing to donate to charities, donate their time, donate their money. But again, that just mitigates the effect of poverty. If we want to talk about really preventing poverty in the first place, then we have to look at implementing policy. And an income-first approach is how we would go about implementing policy to change that.
When you say income first, a job, you mean employment?
No, I mean income first, guaranteeing people access to an adequate living income. With a minimum wage that doesn't even meet those minimum standards that we've defined, then people are going to find themselves living in poverty and needing those services. And if we really want to prevent poverty, we want to look at how do we prevent people from needing to access those services in the first place.
Sure, absolutely. Again, what can Calgarians do, Carolyn, with Momentum? How can they help out?
I would encourage Calgarians to think about where they spend their money during the holiday season. Ask themselves, can I buy my gifts from a place that is paying a living wage, that is ensuring that everyone who's benefiting from that purchase is also going to be able to enjoy the holidays? I would encourage Calgarians to really think about what sort of Alberta they want to live in and see if they can support some of these policy discussions that are happening. We are really encouraged by what we're seeing both at the city and at the province. And to be able to tell your elected officials that you're behind that initiative would be really helpful for us too.
Makes perfect sense. Cynthia?
I think for me and the YWCA, I mean, one of the important things is for the community to become educated. I mean, even if you don't have a social service bent or you know, don't buy into the whole dignity of the individual argument, there's the economic case that's been clearly made that poverty is costing Alberta somewhere between $7 and $9 billion a year. Healthcare costs. There's not only the feminization of poverty where women are disproportionately affected, but there's criminalization of poverty where people are committing survival crimes just to get ahead. So again, people have to become informed because I really believe in the goodwill in Calgarians, and if they honestly understood poverty more clearly and how it's affecting them as well and their own community, I think that we would see people being able to leverage their own positions within the community to make some real policy reform.
Yeah. It seems so simple, but it's clearly there's a lot of work to be done. Folks, our half hour is almost up. After this, we're going to take a, well, you know what it is. It's our random question wrap. So stay with us.
An eye-opening experience for me when it comes to poverty was volunteering for this particular organization that their aim is to put together lunches and snacks for children who are going to school, you know, who otherwise wouldn't have the adequate lunches and food that they need. So at first I didn't think that this was a huge number of kids that are going without lunches and that kind of thing, but once we dove into the statistics and we're seeing like 25% of kids, you know, their parents can't afford to send them with what they need, it kind of opened my eyes as to what poverty is and how we perceive it. You know, I always perceived poverty as homelessness, it's in your face, you kind of can see it, but I think it's this emerging class of, you know, working parents, double income families, you know, and they're trying to just stay afloat with kids and that kind of thing, and they may not wear their struggles on their sleeves. So I think that part of kind of combating, you know, poverty is just being aware of what it actually is. You know, having families being able to have good incomes that can sort of outgrow the inflations going on in society, because really the working class, a lot of them are poverty stricken and we would never know it.
Okay, we're going to wrap things up with our random question. Now, the way this works, I've got no idea what's on these sheets of paper. Cynthia, I'll let you do the honors. You pick one, pass it back to me, I'll ask you the question and we can all weigh in. The question is, do you feel all the money that went into the new LRT was worth it? About $1.4 billion, the West Side LRT. What do you think? Money well spent?
I would say yes, money well spent. I think one of the things connected back to poverty is the ability for people to get around in an affordable transit system. Yeah. And especially we're seeing that in outlying areas, industrial areas, where people need to get to work, they can't afford a vehicle, need LRT access. So anything to build our social infrastructure in ways that help people that are marginalized, I support.
Fair enough. Carolyn, what do you think? LRT? Good money spent?
You know, I wrote it yesterday. It's a beautiful ride. I absolutely support it for many of the same reasons as Cynthia. You get to know your neighbors. You get to be at work in a more environmentally sustainable way, probably quicker now. Yeah. And it also, again, expands the infrastructure for people who may not have another choice.
Is this the way the city's going? What do you think, Leah? Is it going to be all about these? Because there's another one planned. There's another two planned, apparently, right?
I think it's necessary for the city to go in that direction. And right now, I think Calgary is only easy to get around in if you have a car. So,
it's so true.
we need to make that difference for the environment and for folks that cannot afford to have a car and the maintenance required.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, doesn't it? Of course, our city is so not walk-friendly, though. It's just not very walkable at all, is it? I'm in the Harvest Hills area, and if you don't have a car, I mean, I don't know what you're doing. You can ride your bike, but I don't know how you're hauling all your groceries home on your bike. It's kind of a tough angle. Folks, thanks very much for joining us. Hopefully we have shed some light on what is indeed an important issue. I want to thank everyone that sent us messages, tweets, Facebook. We really do appreciate your insight. Keep it coming. It always seems to spark some pretty good show ideas. If you want to see a topic on air, contact us via social media as always. We will be back January 10th, 2013. Have a happy holiday. Goodbye.